come to the statement on the heatwave response. I call the Secretary of State, Kit Malthouse.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on this week's heatwave. Coningsby in Lincolnshire broke records yesterday when it registered a provisional reading of 40.3 degrees Celsius. According to the Met Office, no fewer than 34 locations around the United Kingdom exceeded the country's previous highest temperature of 37.8 Celsius set in 2019. We have seen a collective national endeavour to prepare for and manage the effects of the heat, from Town Hall to Whitehall and across various industries, to keep people safe and infrastructure functioning. From water companies and rail engineers to public servants right across the land, everyone has pulled together, with members of the public responding in a way that was responsible and took the pressure off vital public services. Our national resolve has been exemplified by our fire and rescue services, for many of whom yesterday was the busiest day since World War II. They were undoubtedly stretched but coped magnificently, and the systems put in place to make sure the fire service can operate on a national basis as well as locally worked well. In tinderbox conditions, they have dealt with dozens of wildfires around the country over the past 24 hours. 15 fire and rescue services declared major incidents and handled emergency calls the length and breadth of the country. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, at least 41 properties have been destroyed in London, 14 in Norfolk, 5 in Lincolnshire and smaller numbers elsewhere. On behalf of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, and I'm sure the whole House, I'd like to pass on our sincere condolences to those who have lost their homes or business premises. And I know my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, is working closely with local authorities to provide support to them. Throughout recent days, the Prime Minister has monitored our work and has been specifically briefed on a number of occasions. We did so again this morning. The Prime Minister was briefed during the wildfires by Mark Hardingham, Chair of the National Fire Chiefs Council and the Civil Contingency Secretariat, and he has also passed on his thanks to all the brave firefighters who sought to control the flames in such debilitating conditions. I would also, Mr. Speaker, like to pay my tribute to the fire control staff, officers and support teams for their essential work, and the other agencies that have made such tremendous efforts in recent days: the NHS, our emergency call handlers, Police and Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, amongst many others. Honourable members will be relieved to know that some pressure on these services will now ease as the fiercest heat has subsided. Many incidents are now being scaled back. Thunderstorms are likely this afternoon, but for much of the country, more clement, dry conditions are the pattern in coming days. The Met Office, however, stresses that the summer is likely to bring further hot weather and wildfire risk remains elevated. That is why we're treating this heatwave as an exacting test of our national resilience and contingency planning. As always, Mr. Speaker, there is no room for complacency. We have seen over the last few days what you can achieve when you prepare properly and then work closely together. Owing to the technical expertise of the weather forecasters who predicted with admirable precision the peak of the heatwave and how high the temperatures would be, the Government was able to launch an advanced campaign of comprehensive public advice. And our early data shows how, well before the heatwave arrived, people were taking on board this advice from the UK Health Security Agency, the NHS, the Chief and Deputy Medical Chief Officer, emergency services and key agencies on the ground. And because of our established local networks and colleagues in the devolved administrations, we had people spread across the UK ready to step in when it matters. I am particularly grateful, Mr. Speaker, for the cooperation and support we receive from the Scottish Government, Welsh Government and Northern Ireland Executive. We all need to manage these events together. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to give some examples of how people taking the right action help to mitigate the effects of the extreme weather, starting with heeding advice. Fully 5 times as many people accessed NHS England internet pages on how to manage the symptoms of heat exhaustion in the critical week beginning July the 11th. That's 5 times as many. Moving on to our vital 999 call services, we had feared that they would come under untold pressure. Yet, as the mercury climbed inexorably on July the 18th, fewer 999 calls were made than the week before, and more 111 calls, again suggesting that the public had heeded the advice, this time to avoid 999 unless in emergencies. And on to travel, Mr. Speaker, and once again people were playing for the team. The public stayed at home to avoid the heat, not venturing far. The data bears this out. On Monday, footfall at major London stations was around 35% of normal post-pandemic levels. Yesterday, Network Rail reports passenger train numbers were around 40% down on the previous week. We did not forget those who cannot easily leave their homes either, asking people to look out for the elderly and vulnerable family members and neighbours. Tragically, however, Mr. Speaker, 13 people are believed to have lost their lives after getting into difficulty in rivers, reservoirs and lakes while swimming in recent days. 7 of them, sadly, teenage boys. And I would like to pass on our sincere condolences and that of the whole House to the families of the victims for their terrible loss. Of course, we still have to work through the longer-term consequences of the heatwave. The true picture will not come until all incidents are analysed, all emergency teams are debriefed and all incident logs and data reconciled. There is a great deal of data yet to come in from colleagues in the devolved administrations and from the local authorities and agencies around the country. We do recognise, Mr. Speaker, that we are likely to experience more of these incidents and that we should not underestimate their speed, scope and severity. Britain may be unaccustomed to such high temperatures, but the UK, along with our European neighbours, must learn to live with extreme events such as these. The Government has been at the forefront of the international efforts to reach net zero, but the impacts of climate change are with us now. This is why we have a national adaptation programme under the leadership of the Environment Department. As we have seen in recent days, we will continue to face acute events driven by climate change. It is the responsibility of the Cabinet Office Ministers to coordinate work across government when these events take place. The Government will continue to build our collective resilience. To this end, the National Resilience Strategy, about which I was asked on Monday, will be launched at the earliest possible opportunity by the incoming administration. In the meantime, I will continue to coordinate the work of teams across government in building resilience to make sure the country is ready to meet the challenges of the autumn, the winter and beyond. And it is in that spirit that I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The events of the last few days have been incredibly traumatic for communities across Britain. Individuals and families have had their homes destroyed, and as the Minister says, lives have been lost. And as a mother of teenagers, Mr. Speaker, I reiterate they must not swim in our rivers. It is too dangerous for them to do that. Farmers and businesses have also seen their livelihoods go up in smoke. We saw horrifying images of the A2 on fire yesterday, and I want to join the Minister in paying tribute to the incredible bravery of our fire services and those whose job it is to head straight into danger as the rest of us escape it. Sadly, 4 firefighters have been hospitalised in South Yorkshire and over a dozen injured in London. I know the whole House will give them our gratitude and wish them well. But for too long, Mr. Speaker, our public servants have been underappreciated and undervalued by this government. The Minister mentioned our fire services. Over the last 10 years, their funding and staffing of the fire and rescue service has been cut and response times have gone up by 8%. Yesterday, no mutual aid was available to services facing literal firestorms. Mr. Speaker, this statement today is far too late. The impact of this heatwave was completely predictable. Why the delay in coming to this House? It has literally taken the country to go up in flames for the Minister to turn his focus on this emergency. Climate change, Mr. Speaker, will cause more and more national emergencies like this, from heatwaves to fires, floods and pandemics. But as we've seen over the past week, the leadership contenders are doing their hardest to outbid each other on how they would cut action on climate change. They will leave us vulnerable to more freak natural disasters. The caretaker minister opposite says it's his job to chair Cobra meetings, but it should be the job of the Prime Minister to lead. Yesterday, the remaining cabinet gave the Prime Minister the complete volumes of Sir Winston Churchill as a leaving gift. But he is no Churchill, Mr. Speaker. He has been missing in action. And can the Minister tell us where he was as the country burned? Where was he when Cobra was called last weekend? Has the Prime Minister attended any talks with ministers or senior officials in the days since? Isn't it the truth that the Prime Minister and his entire government have gone missing while Britain burns? We might have cooler temperatures today, Mr. Speaker, but another heat wave is inevitable as our climate heats up. Britain cannot continue to be so unprepared. He tells people to drink water and wear a hat. It's just not good enough. We need a long-term emergency resilience plan for the future. So can the Minister say, where is the plan for delivery of essential services? How will people be kept safe at work, on transport, in hospitals and in our care homes? Where is the guidance for safe indoor working temperatures. He now says the government's National Resilience Plan will be published in due course by the new administration. It's already 10 months overdue, Mr Speaker. Why should the British people be forced to wait a whole year? It is the primary duty of any government to keep the public safe, and Britain deserves much better than this. Labour already has a resilience plan for the long term. We would implement a department-wide approach and appoint a Minister for Resilience. We would give local government the resources they need to plan and prepare for emergencies. And I'd just like to say that local government has been on the front line, and I pay tribute to their response to this crisis and what they did during the pandemic. But their resilience, Mr Speaker, has been eroded by 12 years of cuts and austerity at the hands of this government. And finally, Mr Speaker, Labour would empower businesses and civil society organisations to strengthen our response. Homes have been destroyed, our brave firefighters hospitalised, and lives have been ruined and lost. Enough is enough. If he's not willing to take the action, Mr Speaker, we on this side of the House are. Yeah.